I'm going to kick things off by saying a big hello and welcome to our audience. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us today. We are so grateful that you've decided to spend your morning with us, Denver Museum of Nature and Science, the Center for the American West, and all of our wonderful panelists and speakers. So thank you from the bottom of my heart for being here. And I know I speak for all of our speakers as well. My name is Talia. I'm the Virtual Experiences Coordinator at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science. And my role today is to really be the voice for you, the audience. So when we come to the end of our time today, when we're ready for some Q&A, I'm going to be relaying your questions to the experts. If you have any comments during the program that I think need to be illuminated right then and there, I might also give you a shout out there as well. So do me a favor, and if you haven't already done so, take a moment to type in the chat and say hi. Let us know where you're watching from today. Maybe you're at home, maybe you're in the office, maybe you're teleworking. Tell us too, what's your special interest in being part of this program today? What motivated you to sign up? What are you excited to learn about? Knowing that about you is also really great for us. We really want this presentation today or this symposium to really just feel like a conversation that we're all having in a living room, in someone's living room. So you talking to us will just help us get to know you a little bit more. It'll help it feel really communal. And so say hi in the chat. We're really excited to get to know you a little bit. One more quick note before I move on is that your chats are going only to us, just the panelists. So if you're not seeing anybody else's messages, that's why we have it set as an extra security and privacy feature that your chats go only to the speakers in the webinar today. But don't worry, we are seeing them and we will give you a shout out. We will be able to ask those questions, so send them along. It is my distinct pleasure now to introduce Research Associate from the Denver Museum of Nature and Science, Dr. Bob Reynolds. He's going to talk for just a couple of minutes about the event today, and then he is going to move it along and introduce Dr. Patty Limerick, who I think many of you are familiar with. And she's going to kick things off and move us through our outline today, move us through the presentations, and introduce some of our fabulous speakers. Bob, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you, Talia. Good morning to everybody, and we're delighted to have you join us. This was originally going to be a symposium held in the Denver Museum, and we've modified ourselves into the new format. This is a webinar, 4-part series. It's going to be today and Thursday of this week, and then Tuesday and Thursday of next week. So we hope you'll join us for all of these events. I'd like to give a shout out to the organizers. This is put together by the Colorado Scientific Society, and Tom Cassadval and Jim Paces were part of the team there that helped put this all together. And then our collaboration with the Center of the American West, with Patty, whom you'll meet in a couple minutes. Kurt Gutcher and Shelby Linton were extremely helpful on that side. And then, of course, we're cooperating and collaborating with the Denver Museum of Nature and Science. And Talia, you've met, and Jessa Phillips is behind the scenes, helped us all out. So this comes to you as a team effort. The overall idea of emulsification needs to be explained maybe. We're taking energy issues and water issues and blending them together. This was something that a friend of mine, Ed Dolly, suggested from the Rocky Mountain Association of Geologists, good friend of ours. And the overall objective of the webinar is really to explore issues of water and energy in Colorado in the Mountain West. We're going to start with the first program today from the point of view of providers, where the energy and water is coming from. And then we'll look at the second session will be a point of view of the consumers. And next week, we're going to look at the technology. In the beginning of the week on Tuesday, we'll look at sort of current technologies that are being used, some of the cutting edge technologies. And then the last session next Thursday, we'll be looking into the future. So where are things going? What are some of the interesting potential new avenues? And I'd really like to just welcome again, everybody. We're delighted to have you. And I'm going to introduce Patty Limerick from the Center of the American West, and she's going to be the moderator of the program. So Patty, take it away.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. It's so great to be here, and it's really an honor. It was going to be really fun to have all of us in the same room at a conference. Well, we'll do that, but it'll be sometime in the future, I guess. This is a wonderful alternative, and we really appreciate your adaptability to do this, and great to see the arrivals coming in. I do want to add, I was going to do all those thank yous, but Bob scooped me on that, so I just get to thank particularly Kurt Gutjahr and Honey Aschenbrenner and Lisa Cooper from the Center of the American West for helping out on our side, and then just to ratify everything else he said for thank you. So there are 3 more of these upcoming, as Bob told us, so make sure to tell your friends to register and get in on this. We do have a wonderful lineup for today of participants, but we wouldn't mind having a few more. So everybody is commissioned to ask 3 friends to join, to add to that, so that we just keep multiplying and taking over, I guess. So I had thought that the title, my own nomination for the conference title was this: What Nature Has Brought Together, Let No One Put Asunder, Assembling the Pieces of the Energy Water Puzzle. And at that point, I was going to reach out to Chris Worth of Liberty Jigsaw Puzzles, and I was going to get Liberty Jigsaw Puzzles for all of the people who made the most insightful comments and so on. But alas, we didn't end up with that title. The subtitle, or the slogan, was really good too. Coloradans preoccupied with water and Coloradans preoccupied with energy unite. You have nothing to lose but your sense of being outnumbered by people who don't understand how much their well-being rests on both water and energy. So that was going to be a sort of revolutionary slogan, and there would be people carrying banners and so on, but that also blessedly didn't happen either. So, okay, so now it is an honor to be permitted to be the moderator, and I want everyone to see how seriously I have taken this honor. For the first time in months, I am dressed. Look at this. I have a skirt, I have boots, I have cowboy boots. Cowboy boots, whoop, there, cowboy boots. So that is the first time in 5 months. And if you don't believe that I'm honored by this, well, now you don't, you know, because you've seen the boots. They fit. I mean, you can still wear shoes after you haven't been doing that for a while. So I am also in charge of monitoring the time to allow opportunity for audience questions. And so 1 or 2 minutes before each panelist's time limit, if it doesn't look like we're heading into port to finish that panelist presentation, I have the first time ever this wonderful device. So this is an ominous black cowboy hat. And if I think, uh-oh, not quite getting ready to slow down, so then I will be off the screen, but I will pop back on the screen and I will have this ominous hat, the Stetson. I got it at the Cowboy Poetry gathering years ago, so it's very authoritative. So that will be your signal. Okay, now a couple of things. This, again, energy and water are brought together. They are 2 hubs for everything of importance in the West. They are overlapping and intersecting, but they are often discussed at separate conferences and separate forums. So this is very cool, what Bob Reynolds and his pals wanted to do here. We have journalists involved today and Thursday, because that is really important. We are in the post-specialization era, the dawning of the post-specialization era. We gained a great deal from specialization. That was remarkable how much human understanding came from that, but it got fragmented, it got siloed. So we are coming out of silos and coming out of fragmentation, and it is a wonderful era in human history. Not so wonderful maybe in some other ways, but really wonderful in the post-specialization thing. Journalists are key to that, and so that's why we're really glad we have that involved. Groucho Marx used to have secret words, and if any of the participants said the secret word, a duck would come down and there would be money, I think, involved. No duck, no money, but there are words, which I will just tell you that I've asked all the panelists in some way or another to return, even just very briefly, to the question of what was normal, what might be normal in the future, whether in fact the word normal is just going into retirement and not so useful. So normal is one of the Groucho Marx secret words, if I might invoke his wonderful heritage. Prepared, what it means to be prepared for a future that is very hard to spell out in clear and definitive terms, and the word resilience, which many of the panelists were going to use anyway. And so how do we take on whatever is coming at us and come through in a resilient way? What I didn't expect in the way of themes was what my horoscope in my paper and print copy of the Denver Post, Bruce, that I had on my lawn this morning. My horoscope there said at the end, I thought, it's very provocative, I don't quite know what to make of it, that I should select peace, forgiveness, and release as my major themes. Release from what? Release of water from a dam? That doesn't seem exactly, that seems to privilege that infrastructure over others. Release from lockdown and release from staying at home and not having all these cool people who just showed up as attendees in my company. Release from narrow limits of specialization, yes, that we have for sure. And we will just go with peace and forgiveness as somehow part of the program. Nobody has to use those as secret words, but you can have those in your mind. So really promising, really happy to be here. And I introduce each speaker and they speak for a certain amount of time. And then we, by somewhere pretty much around 11 o'clock, we'll be heading into taking your questions. And Talia, our wonderful I don't know what she is. She's in control of us, really. She can shut us up at the drop of a hat with her muting thing. She's really Talia rules, and she will be bringing in questions from you, members of the audience. So our first speaker is my friend Eric Kuhn. He is the former general manager of the Colorado River District, a position he held for more than 20 years. He also served on the Engineering Advisory Committee of the Upper Colorado River Compact Commission, enormously important body, and the Colorado Water Conservation Board, representing the Colorado River Basin. He is also a veteran of the Navy. He has a recent co-authored book, Science Be Damned, Science Be Damned, How Ignoring Inconvenient Science Drained the Colorado River, and that is a must-read book for every civically engaged Westerner. Here is Eric Kuhn speaking on West Slope water use trends and issues in the age of climate change. Eric.
Well, thank you. Good morning, everyone. As Patty said, I'm about a 40-year resident of Colorado. I came to Glenwood Springs after graduate school and after a short career in the Navy, well, 6-year career in the Navy, and I've been involved in water ever since. I managed the Colorado River District, which essentially covers the Colorado River in Colorado, west of the Continental Divide. And residents of Colorado, we're seen as a state as the mother of many rivers because we have the mountains. And the mountains are the headwaters of the Arkansas River, the South Platte River, the North Platte River, the Rio Grande, and the Colorado. And of course, the Colorado is the largest of those. What nature has given us is storms that move in from the Pacific and dump relatively large amounts of snow on Colorado's mountains on the west side, less so on the east side. Now, we also have a situation in Colorado where most of the water is in the Colorado River Basin. Most of the people live on the Colorado Front Range. So you used to be saying 90-10, whether it's 85-15 or whatever, but about 70% of Colorado's water is in the Colorado River Basin, and about 85% of their people are on the Front Range. Now, first, let me talk a little bit about the Colorado River. It's 250,000 square miles. It's got its headwaters up in Grand County or up in Wyoming and the Wind Rivers. It drains to the south and to the west, and ultimately goes into the Gulf of Baja California. Now, that 250,000 square miles is primarily low desert and high desert and mesas and a few mountains. About 90% of the river's flow comes from about 15% of the land, which is that area above 9,000 feet where it rains and snows. And most of that occurs in Colorado. The basin drains or has parts of 7 states and 2 countries, Mexico and the US. And because it's a relatively large river in a very dry area, there has always been intense competition for its waters. Now, I want to say that even though it is considered one of the nation's major rivers, we often refer to it as the North American Nile, it is a relatively small river in terms of flow. If you look at its flows, it ranks somewhere between the Hudson and the Illinois River in terms of annual flow at the mouth. Now, there's 2 things I want to mention. Energy is important. We're talking about the energy-water connection. We, throughout the basin, use a lot of energy to pump water. We pump water from the Parker area into Phoenix and Tucson, from the Parker area into the coast, into Southern California. We pump it up into Las Vegas. Now, I will say in Colorado, because we have those mountains, we don't do as much pumping. We let gravity work for us because we have that opportunity with our mountains. The other thing that we need to talk about on the Colorado River is climate change. The river's flows are being impacted by climate change. As the temperature of the region increases, even if precipitation stays the same, or even if precipitation goes up, the flow will go down because there's more evaporation, more evapotranspiration. So the river is being impacted. Every drop of water in the Colorado River system has been used for the last, not a drop makes it to the Gulf of Mexico, except when we design it. The river has these very large reservoirs in Lake Powell and Lake Mead, roughly 4 years of annual flow. So we have some capacity. Now, what climate change has done is it doesn't give us enough water to fill these reservoirs anymore. When I first started in the early 80s, they were full. And they were full up through the 90s, but as development increased and development of these big projects in the lower basin completed, now these reservoirs are less than half full. So we have a problem. Now the river is governed by what we call a law of the river. It began with a compact back in 1922. A compact is nothing more than a contract among the states that's allowed by the Constitution, and it has to be approved, of course, by Congress. What this compact did is it split water up among among the states, but principally in 1922, it was between two basins, an upper basin and a lower basin. The dividing line is in northern Arizona. And the reason we have a compact is because we in the upper basin, in Colorado in particular, were concerned that rapid development in the lower basin, particularly in Southern California, and with prior appropriation, that they would take all the water. So we had the ability to prevent them from passing legislation in Congress because we had a Senate at the time that was divided, 2 senators per state, just like it is today. So we had some political power, and we used that political power to say, if we're going to support your legislation to build what is now the Hoover Dam, then you're going to have to set aside a little bit of water for our future use. Now, so that's the law of the river. There's the compact, there's also a treaty with Mexico, there's an upper basin compact, and there's, the compacts weren't perfect and the law of the river isn't perfect, so we did a lot of fighting in court. The big one was in the 50s and 60s in what's called Arizona v. California, which sort of apportioned the lower basin. Now, this is a river on which there are many conflicts because every drop is used and because climate change is reducing the supply. So what we know is that in the future, there's going to be less water than there is today. So we're using every drop today, and in the future, there's going to be less. So that means that people that are using water currently are going to have to use less. Now, if we look at the river and say, well, who uses how much water? About 70%, 2/3 of this river is used for irrigation. Another 1/6 or so is used for municipal uses. And another 1/6 goes away to reservoir evaporation on these big, large reservoirs. And the river also not only provides water for in-basin uses, but Albuquerque, Santa Fe, Pueblo, Colorado Springs, Denver, Boulder, Longmont, Greeley, Cheyenne, Salt Lake City, Los Angeles, Pasadena, San Diego, all outside the basin, all use water from the Colorado River. So its impact on the region is great. Now, there are also many environmental problems. We've taken a river that flows for 1,400 miles and we've chopped it up with the construction of dam. And today we have problems in the Grand Canyon. We have native fish that are going away, so the Endangered Species Act is important. The bottom line is there are many, many environmental problems. Now in the future, this law of the river I mentioned apportioned or allocated 17.5 million acre-feet of water on paper, but in the future we might have an 11 or 12 million acre-foot river. So you'd think, how are we going to reduce our demands? I actually think the future is bright. And why do I think the future is bright? I think it's bright because of conservation. Cities like Los Angeles and Las Vegas and Phoenix are cutting way back on their per capita use. Las Vegas is a great example. 20 years ago, it was using 300,000 acre-feet, which is a measure, and serving 1.5 million people. Today, it's serving almost 2.5 million with 1/3 less water. When I started working in early 1981, Denver Water was using about the same amount of water they are today, but they were serving a half as many people. So the future really is bright because of conservation, 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 and collaboration. My co-author, John Fleck, says, as a human species, we learn to use the water that nature's given us, but now we need to learn to, and we will adapt through cooperative agreements to use less water, but we also have to accommodate new uses for the environment, and we have a commitment to our native tribes that has gone unfulfilled, and they will require some water. So it's going to be an interesting time on the Colorado River Basin. And with that, that's my sort of overview, and I'm very tuned to the timing, so I'll turn it back to Patty.
Boy, these engineers, boy, that was exact. I was just thinking, oh, I'll get to use the hat, and you were done. So boy, engineers, I need to go sit at your feet here. Okay, so thank you so much. And you did not get any, I don't think you got the Groucho Marx words, but you don't have to, because you hit the theme of optimism, which is really what we're hoping for. There's no question we could be doing gloom, but you really didn't let us do that. So we appreciate that very much. And you were off the hook for the Groucho Marx secret words. So, but in the question and answer, maybe you'll come back to that. So our next speaker is, oh, pardon me, I've got the wrong page here, is Lorna Katz, and she is the Climate Science Policy and Adaptation Program Director for Denver Water. Her primary responsibility is to lead climate investigations and implement findings to inform planning, policy, and research. She is a leader in the profession of water management. She's incoming chair of the Water Utility Climate Alliance. She is past president of the American Water Resources Association of Colorado section. And she was the lead practitioner of the organization that has the most excellent name of the 21st century, the total prize-winning organization for best name. The organization is called Decision Making Under Deep Uncertainty Society. What a group. And how do we get our membership forms to join the Decision Making Under Deep Uncertainty Club? So here she is, Lorna Katz, and she is speaking on providing drinking water in Colorado.
All right. Well, hello, everyone, and thank you for letting me be part of this conversation. I'm thrilled to be here. Bob asked us to be part of a couch conversation, and I am sitting on my couch right now in my living room. So at least checking off that part of the Groucho Marx checkbox. So I'm going to share with you guys perspective of drinking water in Colorado and tell you a little bit about how we are preparing for the future. So Eric talked about water in the West, and this is a graphic to just kind of articulate and illustrate what he was talking about. So in the Western United States, particularly in the Southwest United States, we're much drier than the rest of the United States is. So we, in Colorado, we are a semi-arid region, so drought really is the name of the game in our area. And our most productive river is the Colorado River Basin. So we're gonna look more at that in a second. So zooming in, and also, again, Eric hit on some of this stuff already, but zooming into the state of Colorado, in blue, this is the west slope of Colorado, so everything on the west side of the Continental Divide. And in green, we have the watersheds on the east side of the Continental Divide. And in our region, 80% of the water is on the west slope, but 90% of the people live on the east slope. You can see here that the main stem of the Colorado, leaving the state of Colorado, is 4.5 million acre-feet of water, whereas on the South Platte, we're at 400,000 acre-feet of water. So the main stem of the Colorado is over 10 times greater than the South Platte River, where the majority of people live. And Denver Water, our service area is on the South Platte Basin. We serve a quarter of the state's population. So 1 in 4 Coloradans get their water from Denver Water. Within our service area are 1 million jobs. We are responsible for a little over 30% of the state's GDP. And our customers use less than 2% of the water used in Colorado. The uses in the state of Colorado are mostly agricultural uses. So 88% of our water is used for ag. 8% goes to municipal uses, like drinking water for cities and counties, and the last 4% goes to large industries. Another thing I want to note about the state of Colorado is we are a headwater state. So water accumulates here mostly through snow and leaves our state through our rivers. So we don't have water coming into the state, rather water is coming out of our state. And we have lots of rules and compacts, as Eric talked about, with our boundary states to make sure water is passing those boundaries. So those states that depend on a water, which are 18 other states in Mexico that depend on water that initiates in Colorado, get the water that they need to live and survive and thrive. So the name of our game in drinking water is to make sure water is available when people need it. So we use water obviously for drinking and cooking and cleaning. In the summertime, we use water for outdoor purposes to water our gardens, in our fields, golf courses and whatnot. So in red is an average demand pattern in Colorado, and in blue is a supply pattern. So a water utility's job is to make sure that water is available to meet demands when supply is not available naturally in our systems. So because we're snowpack dominated, our snowpack builds up and there's not very much water going off into the rivers. It builds up and then starts to melt out in the spring and early summer. It peaks and then it slowly melts, it completely melts off, and then eventually goes back down to this baseline flow. And you can see that there's these gaps between where people are using water to meet their needs and when water is available. So our objective is to make sure water is available 24/7, 365 days a year, because it is a public health resource and is basically vitality for people and for our state. Not every year looks as pretty as this blue year does. So this is a nice average year where we're getting a lot of snow melt. You get a lot of water coming from snow, and there's sufficient water to be able to meet these additional needs. Here's an example of the variability, the yearly variability we see in Colorado. Some years are really, really wet, as you can see by these higher lines. Some years are really, really dry, as you can see by these lower points. But Patty said to talk about normal. Colorado is anything but normal. We are variable, we're highly variable. We have a lot of variability day to day, season to season, and year to year. So variability is very much a part of how water works in the West, and particularly in Colorado. So making sure that we have enough water to withstand the droughts that we experience is a critically important part of what water management is about in the West. So here is an illustration of Denver Water's system. So we use reservoirs to store water to make sure that there's enough water available when people need that water, and that there's enough water available when we have back-to-back dry years. So if we have back-to-back dry years and we don't have a lot of snowpack, then we're not going to have a lot of water to work with. So we need to save water so that we have available for people to use when it's really dry. So half of our water for Denver Water System comes from the west side of the Continental Divide, from the Colorado River, and half of our water comes from the east side of the Continental Divide, from the South Platte River Basin. So we store water in these reservoirs. We divert water from the streams it stores in the reservoirs. From the west slope, we move water through the Continental Divide through big tunnels that then pull water down into rivers that are on the east side of the Continental Divide. That water flows down and is stored in areas in other reservoirs on the east side, where we're also storing water that's diverted and collected from the east side. It goes into our treatment plants. It's treated and then distributed to people to use residentially and for industrial school type purposes. It then goes and is treated after it's been used in our wastewater treatment plant. Denver Water doesn't use the wastewater treatment plant. That's run and owned by another agency. But we do have some of that water come back into our reuse plant. So we have a plant that treats effluent water that's already been treated, and it pumps back up through our purple pipes to be used for non-potable purposes. So these are purposes, these are uses that are just non-drinking water uses. So it goes back for use in industrial uses, as well as for use for outdoor watering purposes in parks, gardens, and fields. That water, again, the effluent comes back down into the wastewater treatment plant and then can recycle back through, or is treated and goes back to the river for other people to use downstream. So to say that planning for, or water planning in the West is complicated really doesn't do justice on everything involved in municipal water planning. We deal with a lot of issues. Here we're seeing these pictures illustrate a lot of the challenges that we grapple with. Forest fires, you know, you guys are probably familiar with the fire going on right now in Glen Canyon. We deal with drought. This is a picture of Dillon Reservoir during the 2002 drought. This is on the Frisco side of that reservoir, and you can see the dams are grounded, or the docks are grounded. We dealt with pest infestation really through the 2000s. We had the pine beetle epidemic, and this was one of the largest species die-offs because of climate change that we've observed to date. After forest fires, we get a lot of sedimentation and debris that comes down into our reservoirs. So we have to collect that debris and move it all out before we can treat any of that water. Sometimes we have to pass that water through our treatment plants, and we can't even treat it because it just has too much stuff in it. It's too smoky, it won't meet water quality standards. And of course, we're dealing with aging infrastructure and other just basic challenges of having an old system. Eric Kuhn talked about the Colorado River Compact. Half of Denver Water's water comes from the Colorado River, so that's something that we are definitely involved in, and we watch very closely. We deal with endangered species, drought, population growth. Lots of people want to live in Colorado, and they're continuing to move here even through the pandemic. We have water quality concerns, and of course, the really big challenge is climate change. So will we ever go to a new normal? No, you know, a normal really doesn't exist in Colorado to begin with, but we're committed to changes for the foreseeable future with a warming climate. Colorado has warmed 2 degrees. We're warming faster than the rest of the globe, and that's because we're in the middle of a large body of land. But we're warming, we're going to continue to warm, and that warming is not going to go away. And unfortunately, at its most fundamental, climate warming climate change means water change. And water change as a water utility, and someone working in the water industry, water change is our business. So the way we try to prepare for the future, and Denver Water has been actively preparing for the future for several decades, and we plan out at least 50 years into the future, if not longer. But we have taken a step back and said, how do we best prepare ourselves for the future? Because failure is not an option when it comes to drinking water, the drinking water industry. We are providing a public health resource that needs to be available 24/7. It needs to be high quality, it needs to be reliable. And whenever someone turns on their tap, they need to have that resource available to them. So we know that we're not exactly sure what the future is going to be, but we also know that we need to be prepared for whatever the future will be. So we adopted scenario planning in 2007 or 2008. And scenario planning is a way where we can think about differently about how the future may come to fruition. In our use of scenario planning, we are saying that we recognize climate warming is here and it's going to continue into the future. So we're planning for a future that's going to be warmer or hotter than what we are today. We're also looking at economic changes and how social values might change. And our objective in looking at a lot of different ways the future may come to fruition is that in the near term, we're investing in solutions that work well across all of these different plausible future conditions. So we're setting ourselves up for success no matter what the future will be. Our main objective is to build adaptive capacity in our system. And this really is to sure that we have a resilient system that's both prepared for what we anticipate we will experience and able to bounce back from events that we are unable to completely prepare for. So in building adaptive capacity in our system, for us, that looks like building flexibility in the way we operate our system and in the investments we make. So we want to be able to move water quickly around our system. So let's say the north part of our system has a forest fire. We want to be able to move water from the south part of our system up north so that we can easily or maintain service to our customers. We want a diversified portfolio. And this is the same thing that you would do when you diversify your retirement portfolio. You don't want to put all your eggs in one basket. So we have a series of conservation, water efficiency, reuse, and supply options that we have invested in and will continue to invest in going forward. We want our options to be scalable so that we can upsize or downsize an asset if we need to. We want to preserve options. So if they're really affordable now, we have them available to us, or that they may not be available in the future. We want to preserve them so they're available. And then we are continuously planning all the time, planning for emergency risks, planning for the long term, playing out the what if scenarios so we are prepared for whatever the future may be. So the example I want to share with you guys on building adaptive capacity is our From Forests to Faucets program. And this was an investment between Denver Water and the Forest Service that started in the mid-2000s. And we both invested tens of millions of dollars to reduce fuels, reduce fuel and just create healthier watersheds in different regions and different watersheds in Colorado. So this is what we're looking at. I got you, Patty. What we're looking at here is Buffalo Peak. And you can see there's a lot of trees that were impacted by the beetle kill. By 2013, a lot of those trees have been removed and it looks like a very healthy watershed. And that region actually burned in 2018. And the investments that we made are estimated to have saved over or nearly $1 billion in impacts to both property damage and infrastructure damage, and saved over 1,400 residents from that fire. So with that, I'm going to turn it over back to Patty, and on to Jeff. I'll leave you with a comic of Calvin Hobbes saying, look, a trickle of water running through some dirt, and saying, I'd say our afternoon just got booked solid. Thanks, Patty.
Thank you. Okay, thank you very much, Lorna, and thank you. And you did get secret words, and sadly, we don't have the Liberty puzzles available for you, but if you want one, I'll try to figure it out. So we are now moving to Jeff Ling, our next speaker. We're moving over to the energy side of our emulsion. Jeff Ling is the Director of Energy and Environmental Policy at Xcel Energy, serving electricity and natural gas customers in 8 states. He's responsible for developing strategy and priorities that will continue the company's leadership in the clean energy transition while keeping customer bills low. Xcel is really an interesting operation to watch, as is Denver Water, because they are not the same organizations they were when I moved here in 1984. There has been some significant change. So we've heard about that with Denver Water. Now we'll hear about that with Xcel. Jeff, before going to Xcel, worked a lot with Governor Ritter, worked in Governor Ritter's office when he was governor, and then also at Colorado State University when Governor Ritter took up the issues of energy in a very innovative and exciting way. So here is Jeff Ling, past board chair of the American Solar Energy Society, among other achievements, and he is speaking on building a carbon-free future.
Thank you, Patty, and thank you, Bob. I appreciate the introduction. I really appreciate the opportunity to join the conversation and to give the energy sector, the electric grid perspective on what we're doing to be prepared to build a resilient future. And I'll try to tie it into the water conversation that Eric and Lorna have begun. First, just a little bit about our company. I think this is a Colorado specific conversation, but I want to give you the perspective of Xcel Energy at the corporate level. We are a dual fuel utility. That means we serve both natural gas and electric service. 3.7 million electric customers, 2.1 million natural gas customers across 8 states, from the upper Midwest down to the Texas Panhandle. We've been a leader in wind energy for some time, and we're implementing a strategy called Steel for Fuel that allows us to take advantage of the tremendous wind resource that it exists in the upper Midwest, in the Eastern Plains, and across the Texas Panhandle, and avail those low-cost resources for our customers. So we'll soon have about 10,000 megawatts of wind energy on the Xcel energy system. We've been a leader in energy efficiency. We've had robust efficiency programs for the last 2 decades. I'm really going to focus my comments on carbon dioxide emissions reductions, which is the planning objective toward long-term resiliency against climate change that we are thinking about across our system. So in terms of carbon dioxide emissions reductions, as of the end of last year, we had reduced 44% from a 2005 baseline. And if you think about 44% reduction, it's really a significant number in comparison to, say, the Paris Climate Accord, which would have required a 26 to 28% nationally determined contributions by 2025. It's significant if you think about the previous EPA's Clean Power Plan, which would have required a 32% reduction by 2030. So we've exceeded those reductions already to date across the Xcel energy system in those 8 states I talked about. The industry as a whole, the entire electric industry, is on track to reduce more than 50% by 2030. So a significant amount of carbon dioxide emissions reduced. Patty talked about how much change has happened in the last few decades, and I think the progress to date has been really tremendous. In December of 2018, our chairman and CEO, Ben Folk, announced a new commitment that by 2030, we reduced CO2 emissions 80% from a 2005 baseline, and we would commit to delivering carbon-free electricity, 100% carbon-free electricity by 2050. We think this is a really bold goal. We think it's the right goal, and we're hard at work implementing it, and I want to talk to you about that. Eric talked about the impacts of climate change, and I'm glad that he did, and it's a big part of what we think about in terms of being prepared for the future. And as we were putting together this goal and thinking about the level of stringency and emissions reductions, we worked with an IPCC lead author at the University of Denver. This is a snapshot of that work, and I really invite you all to take a look at the complete white paper on our Carbon Free 2050 webpage. But what this shows generally is that our emissions trajectory, both historically and in the future, are at or below most scenarios that achieve a 2 degrees C warming globally. So the gray bar really represents a range of 19 different climate scenarios that all stay within a 2 degrees C warming limit. We also looked at a 1.5 degree target and found that our strategy is in line with 1.5 degrees as well. I think this is a new contribution to the field of looking at individual corporations and how their targets are consistent with the science. And I really invite you to take a look at that white paper in greater detail. Of course, we can't get to zero emissions without first getting to 60% and 80% emissions reductions. And I'll just point out that we do have a Colorado energy plan that was approved by the Public Utilities Commission in August of 2018. That will achieve a 60% reduction. We have approval to retire 660 megawatts of coal-fired generation, to bring online about 1,800 megawatts of newer renewables, wind and solar, battery storage, and existing natural gas. So that plan is approved. It's in place. We are working toward it and implementing those changes on our system. We are also building a new plan, a clean energy plan, that as per legislation that was passed in 2019, we need to bring forward a plan that achieves an 80% reduction across all sales, retail and wholesale sales, by 2030. And that plan will be filed with the Public Utilities Commission in the spring of 2021. And it will be really a pathway with existing technology. You think about sort of more implementation of the things that we have gotten us to this level of reduction thus far. Increased amount of renewables, getting to higher percentages of 50% beyond of renewable energy, changing the way we operate some of our coal units and even possible coal unit retirements. A role for natural gas and storage in firming those intermittent resources, and I'll talk more about that. Expansion of energy efficiency programs, as well as thinking about how does energy efficiency evolve to include things like beneficial electrification. right? Electrifying other end uses that were traditionally powered by natural gas even, or powered by gasoline or fuel oil, and thinking about those flexible loads, that load management, and matching those loads with intermittent resources. So getting to 80% is really going to be a story of existing technologies and taking them further than we have in the past. But we also want to get to zero, right? We want to get to zero carbon emissions on the electric sector. If the utility sector is going to be a pathway to a low carbon economy, we really know that we have to do that. And we know that we need new technologies today. And the reason that we know we need new technologies today is that if we were to continue with the same that we have today and implement a very high renewable future, we see points of diminishing returns. Now, to be clear, we can get certain customers to 100% renewable energy today with current programs that don't shift costs to non-participants. But when we talk about the big grid, if you will, everybody at all hours of the year, all 8,760 hours of the year, that's where we do really see some challenges with an all renewable future. And these are some of the areas that are really borne out in the literature among folks that look at and study this, this concept. Battery storage won't get us there. This isn't an hourly or a diurnal problem, but really weeks and months. Studies are finding that as much as 8 to 16 weeks of storage may be needed for a 100% renewable future. There are peak capacity implications, meaning more generation. We may have to overbuild the grid 3 to 5x to achieve an all renewable energy future. You can imagine the diminishing returns that begin to happen with more and more renewables. You can imagine some of the land use constraints that might come from that. Costs, there's a knee in the cost curve above high amounts of renewables, 60, 70%. And that really is a function of incremental renewables being curtailed and not closely matching end use load. And that really is that last point here, that studies that look at the possibility of getting there on renewables only have some amount of demand disruption. That is to say, shutting off electricity use when the wind's not blowing or the sun's not shining. And of course, we can't do that to have a fully resilient and prepared and reliable grid. So 100% renewables is not the end path to get to zero carbon. We think that these types of new technologies, carbon-free, 24/7, or we would say dispatchable technologies, hold the promise to get there. It's absolutely too early to tell which of these technology areas will evolve and ultimately become the most competitive, but probably the solutions of tomorrow are in these 5 categories. Advanced dispatch renewables, which includes technologies like deep rock geothermal, zero carbon fuels, which includes things like hydrogen, advanced nuclear, such as small modular reactors, carbon capture and storage for fossil emitting units. And I talked about long duration storage, thinking about weeks of storage, pumped hydro, compressed air, those sorts of things. We think these types of technologies we know today to remove that last 20% of carbon out of the electric grid. Some of them are probably going to have to succeed. And making our carbon announcement as we did, I think in a big part was to send that signal that new technology would be needed for the last 20% of emissions reductions. This is, of course, a conversation about water, and so I will just conclude my remarks on the concept of water. When we think about water consumption in the state, and these are data from the state itself, first off, I should say our own system water reduction has achieved 23% less water consumed since 2005. So we've been able to reduce our water consumption in the electric sector, largely as a function of bringing on more renewables into the system. But of course, electric generation is a very small portion of the total water diverted in the state, less than 0.5%. And the big use, of course, is agriculture, here around 13 million acre-feet. So that's not to say that we don't have a responsibility in water management. We absolutely do. We collaborate with cities and towns, water districts, with agriculture, and many important players to find a mutually beneficial approach to water management in the state. And I think we'll talk about that more in the discussion. Just finally, to think about resiliency, and I know that's top of mind for all of us right now. Energy really is an essential service and one that our customers depend on for their livelihood. Eric talked about conservation, and I really want to anchor into that point that energy saved is water saved. each kilowatt hour that we're able to avoid through efficiency programs, or even shifting to beneficial electrification and moving those end uses to different times, saves water. A kilowatt hour saves about a half gallon of water. As we see a higher renewable energy future, not a 100% renewable future, but a higher renewable energy future, that 23% of water reduction, I think, is absolutely going to increase. But to get to that last 20%, to remove the last increment of carbon off of the electric grid, we know today we're going to need some new forms of technology. We absolutely work collaboratively with our communities, and I think we have a variety of different values that we need to hold together, not least of which is cost, reliability, and safety. So, Patty, I'll stop there, say thank you, and turn back to you.
So much, Jeff. I just wondered a little bit about hydroelectric a couple of times there. So you can talk me off that cliff if that's a cliff later on. And nobody's yet said anything about the pandemic. So that's just a little bit hovering for our discussion with the audience afterwards as well, what that might be doing to all of these important ways of thinking about the future. So our final panelist is Bruce Finley. He is a longtime staff reporter for the Denver Post who covers environment-related news, the land, the air, and water issues around Colorado and the West. He grew up in Colorado, and it's his home, and he is really aware of himself as a person from this area with the chance to serve his fellow residents of Colorado. And he is also very, very attuned to international issues. He's done a lot of reporting. He's reported from 40 different countries, and he has particularly deep experience in reporting from Africa and the Mideast. So that is a particularly cool and a generally cool situation of having him speak to us today. And I am just going to say, as a person who once or twice has been misquoted by reporters over the last 40 or so years, when Bruce interviews you, you can think, I may say something dumb and he may have to quote that, but it will be me and he will get it right. He will get the thing that I tried to say. And even if it wasn't the cleverest thing I ever said, I will take responsibility for that. So Bruce, thank you for having such a steady view of Colorado and seeing it in a worldwide framework as well. So Bruce Finley, who is talking about reckoning.
Yeah, thanks, Patty. This is a challenging and a strange time for reporters. We're dwindling in number. Federal labor stats show there are about 32,000 US journalists left, down from 71,000 or maybe a decade ago. And the surviving frontlines reporters are outnumbered at least 5 to 1 by public relations and other image makers devoted to controlling the information that you receive. And reporters also face attacks and restrictions on access that hinder our ability to carry out our mission of finding, verifying, and delivering information to the people we serve. And yet reporters still are asked to speak at public forums and otherwise weigh in on complicated topics far loftier than our pay grade. In my case here today, in the company of very expert so-called resource provider authorities. I'm pleased to participate, will try my best, and I look forward to helping out however I can for this water and energy symposium. Water and energy are essential for life in the semi-arid West. So this is a topic reporters want to investigate carefully. Do you just want to know what the power and water authorities want you to know about the instrumentalities of ensuring supply? Or do you want to avail yourself of the eyes and ears that journalism traditionally, normally has offered in the United States? My efforts as a reporter to investigate water and energy have led to and helped bring out aspects that the government and utilities sometimes at the time haven't wanted to emphasize or even reveal. What are the impacts on nature of increasing supplies to sustain future growth? Where are authorities looking to divert and store more water in new reservoirs? Will free-flowing streams and rivers survive? What all do Denver's authorities know about the lead that for decades has leached into drinking water from residents' old service lines? How widespread are the so-called emerging contaminants, such as the unregulated forever chemicals? Where do underground fossil fuel pipelines carry hydrocarbons near people? Which pipelines are still, after that fatal Firestone house explosion, largely unregulated and perhaps even unmapped. Who is polluting our air, and what pollutants, how much hydrogen cyanide is released, how harmful, especially for low-income residents, the elderly and children. What is Colorado's plan that lawmakers ordered for containing climate warming? I've been thinking for years, since my assignments in Pakistan and Iraq, and especially during this pandemic, that when the stakes get high, people need the best intelligence they can get. Being able to know things beyond your immediate direct individual experience helps you prepare and build resilience. And so people in free societies from ancient Greece onward have developed news systems to get information necessary to navigate conflicts and challenges. Systems that in the 20th century United States served as moorings against disorder and breakdown. So think of independent journalism as your radar, ideally global in scope, almost as essential as water and energy if you want to live freely in a democratic society. Without good radar, you lose power. Founders of the United States knew the role the free press played in winning independence from our colonial rulers, and they protected it in the Constitution, saying a free press cannot be abridged. Unfree societies where I've worked on occasion, China, Iraq, under Saddam Hussein, Russia, Uzbekistan, Syria, impede reporters because authoritarians control information through propaganda messaging. It is not guaranteed that your society will always have a robust and independent news system. And you might find that to navigate in the future, you have to be like a Cold War criminologist and read between the lines of presidential tweets and official government agency pronouncements, scanning for context in social media, which leaves people cripplingly polarized. When it comes to the water and energy challenges we face, you'd receive mostly messaging from what are called resource providers, semantics and timing crafted as part of messaging strategies, often with the purpose of encouraging desired attitudes and actions. That's how things work in China, in commercial marketing, and increasingly in our own informational selfie-oriented society. We could talk more about this later. First, on how we get water and energy. Nature is actually the resource provider, and it is finite, correct? So we, through our utilities, tap nature to extract and deliver the resources that nature provides, especially since industrialization around the 1870s. Westerners increasingly have seen and recast nature and enframed nature as natural resources to be used. Taxpayers finance a Colorado Department of Natural Resources, and legal architecture is oriented around extraction, prioritizing human demands. And this approach of harnessing and using nature, cutting trees from forests to build tunnels, barns, main streets, blasting out coal for heat and electricity, diverting streams to get water, and discharging waste into rivers, became the basis of our existence, and an approach that led to displacement of native people and other species. And it defines how we deal with the long-term population growth and development boom in the Rocky Mountain West. Yes, in Colorado, from headwaters of major rivers to the rocks that contain coal and uranium used for nuclear power and weapons and oil and gas, and nature has been a bountiful provider. The point of clarification is simply that utilities' role, as I think you've heard from my co-panelists, isn't actually as the provider of resources, but as extractor and conveyor, and with the goal of ensuring availability continuously and without interruptions so that you don't call customer service. But in seeking water and energy, we are up against natural limits and rising uncertainty, as you've heard. You can deduce from the caliber of my co-panelists that utilities, as currently conceived, are having to perform at the top of their game in ceaselessly maximizing efficiency in the face of limits. U1, the population growth and development, adding around 80,000 new residents a year in Colorado, complicates the work of any utility because it has to deliver enough for more people, often in new places along the high, dry plains. Two, impacts of the climate change, as you heard, that we are locked into from burning so much fossil fuel in the past, such as rising temperatures, earlier melting of the winter mountain snowpack, earlier extreme storms, wildfires, inject variability and unpredictability into the efforts to ensure enough energy and water. We've essentially changed what nature provides, and we don't fully know what will happen. Denver Water's manager, Jim Walkhead, last year put it this way: climate change is, quote, changing the whole world out from under us, he said, with temperatures continuing to go up for the foreseeable future. Three, changing politics and societal mandates also make utilities' task tougher. They have to change how they tap nature and what they extract, wind and solar instead of coal and gas. And voters in cities such as Denver increasingly favor conservation, even preservation of nature, at least outside the city. And they're demanding cleaner air, healthy streams and rivers. Younger urban voters may be finding their political voice more. For example, pushing through an unprecedented direct democracy ballot initiative to reintroduce endangered gray wolves on public land to restore ecological balance. We have reached the point where utility planners are forced into near constant playing out of multiplying scenarios. This scenario planning, you've heard a bit from Lorna, trying to anticipate population growth, effects of climate warming, and various land use and political priorities. It gives us options, but planners are hard pressed to factor in every contingency. And what if urban densification along the Front Range spurs faster urbanization in Western Colorado? Second home construction, shops, roads, faster fragmentation of landscapes as jam-packed urbanites flee cities seeking contact with nature. It might be easier for water and energy suppliers if we, as a broader society, reckoned with long-looming value-laden questions. How many more people can fit into Denver? To what extent must nature and natural processes survive? How low could we reasonably expect an urban apartment dweller to go in their use of water and electricity? Should we change our food production or import more so that agriculture's 80% share of the water could be shifted? How much outdoor rec and tourism can the pristine parts of Western Colorado sustain? What is the carrying capacity of the increasingly arid Southwest? Final thought. Maybe by facing these questions, we'll discover new opportunities. And if we've got the fortitude after this virus attack, we'll collectively and collaboratively pursue them. One afternoon last year, I was driving around a bend in the Yampa River, and I saw in the distance a huge industrial structure. It looked like a palace. I thought, this may be what medieval knights felt approaching Camelot. Towers are jutting into the blue sky, light-colored plumes atop the towers like flags waving in the wind. Above these hulking buildings, big enough to hold big fires, and conveyor belt ramps amid heaps of shiny black rocks. Coal from a nearby still functioning mine to feed this massive tri-state power plant. So my reason to be out there was an assignment along the Yampa, which, as you know, is the last major relatively free-flowing tributary on the Colorado River system, kind of like an environmental holy grail. On this long over-allocated river, as Eric's described, that provides water for 40 million people. The Yampa River flows still surge, fluctuating from highs around 14,000 cubic feet per second in spring down to 100 CFS during late summer dry times. And the idea was to float with water problem solvers from all sides between a controlled push-button river, like the Arkansas River, and a last remaining relatively freed, undammed one like the Yampa. So paddling and camping, I learned from big city water managers about drawing board plans to tap more Western Colorado water in a 90,000 acre foot reservoir southeast of Fairplay, similarly a large one in northwestern Colorado, and a 30,000 acre foot reservoir above Minturn in the Holy Cross wilderness. I was thinking, it might, if we don't use the gravity well, it might take a lot of energy to move so much water so far to expanding Front Range cities. And I also learned that that power plant I saw was probably the biggest single siphoner of water out of the Yampa, a plant that soon would be scheduled for closure. The coal-fired power plants around Colorado, which we still rely on for about half of our electricity, if I've got it right, are major water consumers. And Xcel, I believe, is one of the largest single entities holding water rights. And collectively, the coal-fired power plants extract tens of thousands of acre-feet from rivers each year. And that's the equivalent of what a good-sized reservoir stores. So when we shift to wind and solar energy, will more water be available to restore depleted streams and rivers? You know, what will Xcel do with those water rights? There could be public environmental benefits. The water rights likely are worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Other utilities preparing to shut down coal-fired plants, like the one in Colorado Springs where I grew up, are municipally owned. But what are the possibilities? Who should have a voice in what's done with the water? In conclusion, we're in a fix with water and energy. There may be ways out of it. You will need good intelligence to explore these fully and perhaps have a say. And public forums like this one are a good first step in bringing people together toward finding a smarter path.
Thank you, Bruce. So we are now at our stage of transition where Talia comes in, but Talia, I'm going to say that as a ancient person who has done a lot of moderating, I am hoping we can build in some time for the other panelists to respond a little bit to Bruce. Because in our planning session, I did say that we needn't be peas in a pod of agreement. And apparently Bruce took that to heart when I said that would be good. But I also knew that we were perfectly capable of civil exchange and disagreement. So I just wanted to make sure that we give a chance in our next few minutes here for any of the panelists who would like to respond to Bruce, having certainly taken me at my word that this is a group that could provide a model for the American citizenry that doesn't have many of these models of civil disagreement. So, so Bruce opened a few doors for that if we want to do that. And so, but you're in charge now and I shall pass off to you.
Yes, I think we can absolutely make that happen. And I'm gonna cancel the spotlight video on Bruce. I'm so sorry, I have forgotten to do that. So now everybody should be able to see all of us together. Yes, we can absolutely have time for each of our panelists to respond. I wanna make sure that we are still leaving plenty of time for questions. So panelists, if you have a response, if there's anything you'd like to share, let's keep it to about a minute or less, please. Anybody interested in starting off? Or are we perhaps ready to just dive into questions?
I'll just say, I think they might want to percolate a few more minutes on that because I myself, I'll just jump in and speak for them. That'll be really fun. So having watched both Xcel and Denver Water, I think they really have moved in a number of the directions that Bruce wants to see them move. Have they completed the journey? I'll not go there necessarily, but I think they're paid by those organizations. They work for those organizations, and those organizations are really transformed from what they were. So I can see that they might want to have a tiny bit more time to think about how they might respond to that. They are messenger. They're messengers and messengers, and so how do they want to speak to that? So it's so fun when I try to speak for other people. I just do such a flawed job of it, but maybe come back to them after some audience questions.
Sounds good. All right, well, with that, we will then move into taking some questions from the audience. And just a quick note to everybody, there are a lot of us on this call today. So if we are not able to get to your question, I do apologize. We're gonna try and pull as many as we can, as many as we have time for. We may not get to every single one today, but again, we do have 3 more sessions coming up after today. So continue to tune in and perhaps we'll be able to answer your questions then, or your questions will even build into new ones. One of the questions that I saw come in from a lot of different people early on in the presentation, I think after Eric wrapped up, was a question about lawn water use. So the use of water to keep lawns green and how xeriscaping might have a potential impact on water use. And Larna, is that maybe a question for you? Do you have, or Eric, would maybe you be the right person to speak to how could things like xeriscaping, or how do things like water use for things like lawns and gardens impact water use in Colorado?
Well, let me just say, I'll let Lorna take this, but as a general rule, about half of the water that municipalities divert goes to outside uses. In some cities it's more, and in some cities it's less. And I think the key to Las Vegas, the conservation successes in places like Phoenix and Las Vegas and in Southern California, has been a recognition that indoor uses are not that great. We use a lot of water in our washing machines and taking showers, but what happens to that water is it goes right back into the system and it can be reused. Whereas if you use it for a lawn, it evapotranspirates into the air. So the key to their success has been a restriction of lawn watering. I like to say the future of the Colorado River is all about grass. About grass for parks, grass for lawns, and grass for cows. And if we can manage grass, we can live with the water supply we've got. But I will also say that this concept of reducing our footprint on lawns is one that has been very, very slow to surface on the Front Range. I think that if you look at the progress made elsewhere in the world, the Front Range hasn't even dared go toward restricting lawn sizes or paying people to take out their turf. I'd be interested in Bruce and Lorna's thoughts on that, because I think that is really the key to surviving in the future, is going to be reducing our footprint for the various grasses we grow with 70% of the Colorado River water.
Yeah, so this is just a critically important conversation, and one of the most important tools in our toolbox, right? So conservation and water efficiency are things that are just going to continue to grow and evolve across the Front Range for Denver Water, but through all of the water utilities on the East Slope and on the West Slope. It has to be a statewide conversation, and we have to make statewide investments. So Eric, you're totally dead on with the grass, but I think of it as even broader vegetation. So just a quick sidebar, 80% of the water that falls in our state goes back up into the atmosphere through evaporation and evapotranspiration. So as the climate changes, vegetation is going to change as well. So how much water is left in the rivers is a big unknown, and we're incredibly vulnerable to how vegetation is going to be changing over time. But back to the water use side, Denver Water is in the middle of a 5-year efficiency plan, and this has specific targets for individual customers, and we're in the process of developing that plan and helping our customers meet those targets. And we continue to be very, efficient in our land use practices. So it's getting hotter, it's getting drier, and our landscapes, particularly trees, are essential for a vibrant, livable community. We need to think about not only water use, but urban heat island. And water goes a long way for making it comfortable and livable in a semi-arid region. So we want to have trees going forward. We want to make sure that that's available for our community. As trees are put in place to provide sun protection as well as cooling, who's responsible for maintaining and keeping those trees and making sure they thrive and survive in these changing conditions, all of that is still part of a broader conversation. So, I think we are progressive in our efficiency standards and in the actions that we're taking. But then, of course, there's a lot more that we all are going to be striving, and we all, water utilities, are going to be striving to do going forward.
I would just add that as a reporter that's tried to scrutinize a little bit the efforts to conserve water on the Front Range, it's clear that the conservation has made huge gains. One thing we ask for that it's really hard for the utilities to measure, but are gallons per capita per day. And in Denver Water, you can get that on your bill. So it's quite effective awareness building. And I think we're down to about 80 gallons per day on average, among the lowest in U.S. cities. You think of an Albuquerque, maybe they're a little lower. Colorado Springs, I believe, is also fitting in lots more people through conservation, and they're using maybe the water they used in the mid 80s because the efficiency's increased. And as reporters, it's really not that we want these changes. It's not our role to want or not want. It's the reporter role is simply as applying an objective method to scrutinize what's going on and then reflect that in reports. But no doubt there could be bigger gains, I guess, if we change the type of land use and the type of landscaping.
Yeah, and Bruce, one of the things that I would challenge you to do and your industry to do is to help us have a broader conversation of what we want our communities and environment to look like going forward. With climate change, we are committed to changing conditions. What do we want to prioritize to try to save and to help thrive going forward? And I'm talking a broader, a philosophical conversation of what do we want our environments to look like? Where do we want to be putting our time and money? What objectives do we want to be meeting as a community? And how do we get a sense of what people's needs and desires are and align that with really what's realistic and possible in these changing conditions and changing with the changing climate? So I look towards you to help us have that broader conversation throughout the community.
It's an interesting time. I mean, the city of Denver has been closing off streets during the pandemic because so small a portion of Denver relative to other big cities is parks. And so just to let people be able to be outside and have some distance, they had to take asphalt streets and make those be the compensatory open space that we suddenly discovered we did need. I don't know, can you find enough water to irrigate those? If we were to create green belts?
This is a discussion.
Then we won't be heading Eric's way all the time.
This is a great discussion. I'm going to say let's leave that as a rhetorical question for the moment and perhaps put a pin in that because we do have some more questions coming in that I want to make sure we get to. Namely, when we answered that last question and throughout the entire presentation, there have been a lot of questions about agricultural water use. And I think the number 88% of water is used for agricultural purposes that was thrown out. And I saw a lot of comments come in the chat just now about, so what sort of pressure is being put on the agricultural industry or the agricultural sector to make their water use more efficient or to reduce their water use? Is that even possible? So what can any of you tell us about water use in the agricultural industry and its impact on water in Colorado? It's a big question, I know.
And it is true. And I just to mention the numbers, my 70% is basin wide. 88% is a good Colorado number, but the 88% for agriculture and 12% for municipal and industrial didn't include evaporation. Evaporation on these big reservoirs in the Colorado River system is also a major use. And the problem we have with agriculture is that it was here first. We have this first in time is first in right. And we settled these communities, and the farmers in the late 1800s and early 1900s, both in the lower basin and the upper basin, were the first to get together and divert water out of the streams. So they have the senior rights. And I think if you look at what's happening in the lower part of the river, where cities like Los Angeles, the Metropolitan Water District, which serves Southern California, are working with agricultural users to divert their water on an interim basis, I think that is working well. And it's a model that Colorado needs to look at. And it's one that's been slow to, again, capture or gain credibility in Colorado because most municipalities like to control their own water supply. If we don't own it 100%, we don't want it. So there's a lot of cultural issues that we have to come together with, but certainly agricultural conversions are what's been fueling a lot of industrial or municipal growth and industrial growth in Colorado, and I see that continuing as the irrigation community, the market forces are at some point are going to mean that an irrigator can make more money selling his water rights than he can growing crops. And I think in Colorado that happened, that we passed that years ago.
Yeah, that's a good point. Any additions from any of our panelists?
I think, at its most fundamental, what this conversation comes down to are partnerships and developing collaborative solutions. So learning from each other, understanding each other's needs, wants, and desires. And by each other, I mean different industries and different sectors. The energy sector, the ag sector, the municipal sector, we all have different needs and different objectives. And we're dealing with a limited resource. So if we can, as we come together and build partnerships and, come up with collaborative solutions, we are setting ourselves up to have the flexibility to be successful in the future. And we're really starting to see this in Colorado. Eric's noted this, across the Colorado River Basin, which is a little bit further along on the ag to municipal conversation than we are, but it's really about building trust, and making sure that we're all, considering each other and respecting each other and moving forward together to figure out these challenges.
That makes sense. Moving on, I'm going to direct a question now toward Jeff. Our conversation has been a little bit water-centric at this point, so now we're going to throw out some energy-centric ones. Jeff, I did see a couple questions come in specifically about how is Xcel getting creative in continuing to reduce and work toward carbon-free, especially given that forces in Washington, including the Trump administration, are removing some of the pressures to cut emissions and removing some of these regulations. And I've seen a couple of questions about, is Xcel considering anything like the external production of solar panels, wind and geothermal capital, or what creative solutions is Xcel or others in the energy industry entertaining?
Yeah, that's a great question. I appreciate the insightful thought. I saw that pop up in the chat. So, what I would tell you is that if you look at our public comments to this administration and to previous administrations on policies that they've put forward, we really see states in the driver's seat when it comes to their resource planning, right? So everything that we do, all the plans that I talked about, go before a Public Utilities Commission or in front of environmental regulators for approval. So the states are really where the resource plans are developed. The Colorado Energy Plan was developed here, approved by Colorado regulators. What I can tell you is that our corporate goal is to get to 100% carbon-free electricity. And we have a mandate now in Colorado to get to 80%. So we are operationalizing toward that carbon constraint. And so I think that is the guidepost, that is the vision, that is the prize, we think, right? And we think the climate science dictates it. It clearly is stating that we have to get to, the power sector needs to get to zero emissions by 2050. So that's where we think our customers want us to go, and where our investors are increasingly asking us to go, and where the climate science is pointing. So that is ultimately the planning horizon. I think the question about new technologies is a fascinating one. It's where I'm spending a lot of my own time of, as we get to 2030 and beyond 2030, then what happens? What I tried to broach in the conversation is this point of perhaps diminishing returns with the technologies we have. And we've got to pull in some new technologies. And to try to kind of get to Bruce's question, some of those technologies may have water needs, right? They might need water for thermoelectric cooling. And so we are evaluating our water rights for current uses and for the best long-term use for our customers. But some of those new technologies that I talked about may have water cooling needs. Air cooling might be an option. It tends to be more expensive and less efficient. This is a fascinating topic, and I think we are sort of, in many ways, woefully underspent and underprepared as a country to sort of do the R&D and the technology development that we need to bring these new technologies to market. Xcel Energy is really just one player in the utility sector, and so as more and more utilities and electric companies make low and zero carbon, net zero carbon commitments, I think that's bringing to the fore this need for new technologies to address the last 10, 20, 30%, whatever it happens to be for that utility, to ultimately get to a zero carbon future. And I think it's important to point out what we can achieve across the economy as that begins to happen, right? So transportation is the obvious example. We can, a traditional internal combustion engine a vehicle emits about 5 tons per year with normal driving. On our system today in Colorado, an electric vehicle would emit a little bit less than 2 million tons. So in that simple example, you see how a low carbon electricity sector can bring environmental benefits across the economy. But I think it's a great question. This technology innovation is, we sort of need to bring it into the important and urgent quadrant, right? And really try to accelerate that conversation.
Thank you for that answer. We are coming in on just a few minutes left, and so I want to circle back around, and you may have just done that a little bit, Jeff, but do we have any responses to what Bruce shared just a few minutes ago from our panelists?
I would like to have the utility people take that on, but I wouldn't mind a bit if Bruce wanted to hit just really quickly a little bit harder, where are they going in the right direction, and maybe incentivize by complimenting them and patting them a little on the back, and just saying maybe more of that. Although I would withdraw that question if Jeff and Lorna and Eric want to talk more from the supplier's point of view. Okay.
Really not for me as a reporter to say, right direction. Just a matter of, trying to observe what direction and perhaps see the possibilities. I hadn't thought about what Jeff said about some of the newer technologies needing a lot of water. But I think I saw one statistic, maybe you could correct me, Jeff, that Xcel alone might hold 64,000, rights to maybe 64,000 acre-feet of water. And are these new technologies of the sort that there likely isn't going to be any public environmental dividend? Are there any conversations going on within the company? I know it's based in Minnesota and they got a lot of water up there, but it's also a company that, as you've outlined, really is committed to our environmental basis of our continued society. And I'm wondering, what are the possibilities if you know them?
So Bruce, is a great question. And by the way, I'm glad that Patty didn't make me follow you and your poetry as a trained ecologist. I appreciate it. And so what I would say too, in addition to this conversation, is that the role that we play in working with our communities, I see the Big Thompson project, right? The water swap is in the comments. I think that's an important part of this too, right? So how are we a collaborator in this long-term future? And our water rights have a role in that. I wish I could give you more specific answers. Many of these technologies are still very much in the R&D phase. Some of them are still lab bench. Some of them have been tested and deployed. And this is something that we're following very closely, whether that's hydrogen or deep rock geothermal, advanced nuclear, advanced forms of wind and solar, really trying to pull in all that information. So I don't have a specific answer for you for water usage by resource type, but it's just to make sure that we are, as we're thinking about a resilient future, and one that I think we really feel we have to drive towards zero carbon emissions. Some of those technologies may require water for thermoelectric cooling.
And when we're thinking about this, it's important to make sure we're using the right type of water for the purpose. So he probably doesn't, probably doesn't need direct potable reuse, right? For direct potable water for all of the purposes that they're using water for, right? They might be able to use recycled water, reused water to meet a lot of their needs. So we want to really make sure we have the right type of water for the right purpose. And this is along the lines of one water thinking. All of the water in the world is connected. All the water in Colorado is connected. We want to make sure it's used for the right purpose as efficiently as possible.
Absolutely.
I know that we're just about out of time, and I had just one or two things I would like to do as a summation. So, but I'm cutting off questions, although one of the questions does seem to have been aimed at me, that I am asking Bruce to be really nice, which he doesn't have any obligation to be, because in fact, he was just direct. He just raised direct questions. So I want to acknowledge that person in the audience. And then I would like to say just a couple of things at the end, because I think we do have to end pretty much on time. Is that right? Okay, so I would like to say, how strange, the topics separate, even when we were planning to bring them together, that we end up talking about water, and then we talk about energy, and then we go back, and then we have moments of integration, and I see those. I see those. But it is just interesting how those things come together. In the meantime, the consumers have almost exactly the same attitude towards their faucets as they have towards their light switches and their thermostats, which is, I'll turn that on, I'll turn that on, and they don't have to think about it. So I really think there's a tremendous amount of common ground in taking on, in a challenging but gracious and inviting way, consumer attitudes to take energy and water for granted, because the suppliers have done such a great job. So if you have more interrupted supply, then you would have less complacent people, but you've got people who are that. So I would like to see what we could do to push a little bit harder on that. I love the fact that evaporation came up, because I think that is so often out of the picture when we're talking about what happens to water. And Eric, thank you for that, because evapotranspiration is a huge force, and there is no utility that oversees that. There's nobody that does that. But what's really cool, to go back to the integration thing, is that it's the darn sun that does the evaporation. And it is the darn sun that makes this such a wonderful open landscape and a place where people want to be. And it is the darn sun that gives us solar opportunities with landscape disruption attached to that. So it just occurred to me in the midst of things that we are really in a deep relationship here with Mr. Sun. And that is uniting this whole topic in ways that are, well, again, who controls that entity and that force? And yet everything we're talking about is very responsive to that. So, okay, so those are the things I wanted to say in quick conclusion, that it is interesting to see how water does what, in human conversations, what it often does to houses and structures and different built environments. Water penetrates. Water just comes in and works its way in, and suddenly we're just in a water saturated environment. That's why it's called saturated. And energy has a harder time, I think, because it has so many different meanings. And it is something that there's a great many of us who depend on electricity and digital things and electronic things who couldn't explain that to save our lives. We could not say, what is that thing that we are relying on? We can do a little bit better with water. We sort of know what water is in a way that those units of electrical power, as they pulse around at different, that's much harder for us to think of. So there's an interesting way in which where we are in human beings' capacity to think, oh, water, we know what that is, and not so good on the, oh, energy, we know what that is, because there's so many more meanings to that. So those are my it's a start at a summation, and it's only 11:32, so could go further. But should I don't know if I'm to hand it back to you or if I can thank the panelists, or what should I do?
You are welcome to. If you have some closing remarks you'd like to make, you're welcome to go ahead and do that.
I just did that.
Well, there you go. Well, then I will go ahead and thank the panelists for their time and for their diverse perspectives. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for being willing to ask hard questions, give hard answers, and take hard questions too. That's what these discussions are all about. And if I may say so myself, I think that's what makes me optimistic about the future of science and about the future of our planet, is opportunities for people with not necessarily disagreeing perspectives, but different worlds that we live in, to come together and talk about these topics. So thank you, all of you, for bringing your expertise together today. Thank you to all of our attendees for asking questions. Thank you for your attendance today. We really appreciate it. And please do tune in. Our next event in this series is this coming Thursday. That is, again, from 10 o'clock Mountain Time to 11:30 Mountain Time. And then again, next Tuesday and next Thursday. So this is a 4-part series. You've just seen part 1. Please continue to tune in. If you've registered once, that same link will work for all of the events. So keep tuning in. We really appreciate you being here. Thank you all so much, and we'll see you next time. Bye, everybody.
Bye. It's a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.